Good evening everyone, welcome, thank you for joining us. There are more seats available and there are more chairs that are coming for those who would like. They tell a story that once the great Israeli general Moshe Dayan was pulled over for speeding on the Israeli highway. Moshe Dayan, the famous general with the eye patch, and when the police officer saw who it was, he didn't go easy on him. He said, "Sir, you should be a role model for the youth of the Israeli society. You should be setting an example. How can you be speeding and expect regular civilians to do otherwise?" And Moshe Dayan turned to the officer allegedly and said, "Officer, I only have one eye. Do you want me to watch the road or the speedometer?" I feel like Eli K always had his eye on the road. He wasn't worried about the speedometer. He wasn't limiting his pace. He wasn't concerned for how fast or slow he may have been going in contrast to others. He traveled, focused on the road ahead, focused on where he was going and where he wanted to get. And I can only imagine that for Avi and Devorah, the past year has been one of speeding in many respects, not being able to slow down, not being able to take a breath, and keeping your eye on the road, not being able to focus on the speedometer. And it was with that in mind that we thank you for sharing time with us, with our community, with your community. You can imagine it must be very difficult on many levels, but on behalf of everyone here, we thank you and we appreciate you sharing your time and sharing your thoughts and feelings and experiences with us. I think it's fair to say that as a community, we feel very strongly connected to you, Avi and Devorah, and the whole family. And I think in many respects that connection's been strengthened over the past few months. Please God, in future it should be only for simchas and the visits and the phone calls and the events and the gifts and the Zooms. It should all be for good reasons, for simchas and in good health. And I speak for all of us here and for many that are not here, we miss you. We miss you here. We miss you as friends and as colleagues, as a teacher, as a gavai, as advisors to many of us, not just financial advisors, but as people that made a huge impact and continue to make a big impact in our community. It's good to have you here. And we miss Kasriel, and we miss Hanan, and we miss Naama. And we will forever miss Eli. And I was asked to share a short introduction. And the psukim that jumped out from this week's parasha at me. And when I see what Kalev says in this week's parasha, it made me think very much of Eli. I want to quote two psukim. When the Meraglim came back from Eretz Yisrael and they shared a negative report, the Torah tells us V'yahas Kalev, that Kalev silenced them. And I think in many respects, when Eli spoke, people were silent, people listened, people wanted to hear what he had to say, and what he had to say was full of depth and meaning and often entertainment and joy. And people listened to him. He was a good listener to others, and people in turn listened to him. They listened to his music, they listened to his song. He was a natural leader, like Kalev. Yas Kalev Esaom, he silenced the nation, and Moshe's honor. But Yomer and Kalev said, Olei Nailem, let's make Aliyah, let's go up, we can do it. We can surely ascend, and so Eli did. Not just Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, but Eli sought to constantly ascend and to grow and to develop and to learn and to explore and to better himself and to move upwards. Olei Nailem. We can inherit and conquer this land. We can do it. I think there was also Eli's attitude, an attitude of we can, an eternal optimist, someone with a smile on his face, someone who was happy, someone who was joyful and spread that joy. A very charming smile. A smile that got him out of a lot of trouble. And a few psukim later, Hashem speaks of Kalev, he says, Va'avdi Kalev, Eiken Hoysa Ruach Acheres. Kalev had a Ruach Acheres. He had a different spirit. And Eli had a different spirit. He was a trailblazer. He was far from a conformist. He did things his way, in the way that he believed that they should be done. He didn't necessarily care for public opinion or for popular trends. It was an individual, he was a pioneer, he was sincere and honest. He had a ruach acheret. Yimalei acharoi, Hashem says, he followed me. V'haviyosev el haaretz asher bo shoma, I'll bring him to the land that he went to. So did Eli. He went to Eretz Yisrael, there's no question. That was divinely ordained. At the end of the pasuk, Hashem still has to make good on Zari or Yishena, his inheritance, his descendants will inherit it. We want Mashiach now.
Amen.
Avi and Dora.
Woman first. This hall is where I sat for my Kabbalah's Panim. This hall is where Eli had his bris. And this hall is where Eli had many Kiddushim on his Shabbos and wrote many exams. And this campus is ingrained in the life of the K family. We sit here tonight and hold a special place in our hearts. Both the Torah Academy community, school, and the broader Jewish community in South Africa. Sometimes one has to go back in order to go forward. As hard as it is to come back to South Africa, especially for me, as I have not returned since we made Aliyah, and certainly haven't been here since our tragedy, it was time. I knew this when we were sitting shiva, that there was a huge chunk of our lives that was missing. But I also knew that because of COVID and all the other restrictions that were going on at the time, we had to deal with what was. And when Avi finally felt immense pressure to come back to South Africa for work, I said, I'm ready. I need to do this. This is part of my mourning process. To come back to a community where Eli grew up, who knew Eli and all his antiques from a very young age, his teachers, his rabbis, his sites for his family, which goes without saying, who, thank God, mostly were able to be with us at the time. And I felt for me personally, I needed to do this. And people say, why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you here? Why are you standing here speaking? What are you trying to achieve? And when Avi and I spoke about the trip, I said, I don't know how I'm going to manage. There's so many people I want to see. How's it going to work? What are we going to do? And I was in London last week, and I was talking to my brother and sister-in-law, and I said, I'm getting really anxious about this trip because I don't know how to manage it. I hadn't even told my own children at that point that we were coming because we decided to not give too much notice on these kind of things. And my brother said to me, you know what, have an evening. I said, but what are we having an evening about? He said, to share, to tell, to see those that you love and care for, and to see those who care and love you. And I have to say that I'm humbled and I'm overwhelmed by the amount of people that are here tonight to, so to speak, pay their respects. I never want to go back to Shiva ever again. But I do realize and I acknowledge that this is part of my moving forward. I've also come to realize that this community, people here, unfortunately, did not have the opportunity of sitting with us in a shiva environment that would usually lend itself to talking through the events, working through things, understanding how things had happened. And there were a lot of unknowns about the day, the events leading up to it, the event itself. And I'd like to share some of those with you, even though I have to say this is not easy for me. I've kind of moved forward in various ways from those 7 months ago. But I also acknowledge that this is an important step. And so I'd like to very briefly, because that's not really the gist and the theme, and it's not really where I was going, but I realize its importance, just to share some of the events of the day itself and some of the facts that perhaps have gone around about it, just so that we're all on the same page. One thing I always thought as everyone knows, our children made Aliyah before us. And even before that, they went to the Israeli army. And I was always absolutely assured of one thing. And that was, if anything ever, God forbid, would happen to one of my children, I would know about it in a second. Because the Israeli government knows more about you than you know about yourself. Except this time I was wrong. That's not quite what happened. And unfortunately, the events of that day did not show the Israeli government or the Israeli systems in a very good light. And that's, please God, one of the things we are working on. So as many of you heard, on the day there was a terror attack in the Old City, and Avi's going to speak a little bit more about this. There was a terror attack in the Old City at 8:50 on a Sunday morning. Unfortunately, there have been many terror attacks, and in fact, on the Friday before, there'd actually been a terror attack. And my sister-in-law posted on the family group, just checking in, is everyone okay? And I'm like, well, of course we're okay. Like, what do you mean? Why wouldn't we be okay? Sure, we're okay. So that Sunday morning when there was a terror attack, just to put it in context, it was our first, so to speak, normal Sunday. Our son Kasriel had gotten married 2 weeks before. We finished Sheva Brachas on the Tuesday, and this was our first Sunday that we'd had in a while. And I sat down to get back involved in the studies I was doing, and Avi and I were going to spend the afternoon together, going for bike riding, etc. So I was like really focused. So when my phone rang at 9:30, and I saw my son Hanan calling me, I was like, okay, I don't really want to speak now, but let me just take this call. He says, Ma, have you heard there's been a terrorist attack? So I said, no, I haven't, because I'm studying. He says, there has. Have you heard from Ellie? So I said, let me get onto the news, let me see what's going on, and let me get hold of Ellie. I tried to get hold of Ellie, and Ellie didn't answer, which wasn't unusual, because if he was at work, that's what would have been the case. And I happened to phone Naama happened to phone me, and she never phoned me on a Sunday morning because she was always in class, but for that Sunday morning, their apartments were dirty, and they'd all been told that they have to stay and clean the apartments. And I said to her, have you heard anything from Ellie? She said, no, don't worry, Ma, it's raining. Ellie doesn't have to work in the rain. Ellie's job at this current time was a new job. He lived in the south of Israel until 3 months before this job. He started the job in August, and he was working right there at the kotel. As you walk down, and there's a desk on the side that is an information booth, that's where his job was. And it was in the sun, and it was in the rain, and when it was pouring with rain, you didn't have to go to work. So she says, don't worry, there's no doubt that he's sleeping, everything is okay. Okay, that's a great reassurance. You know, I'm watching the news on and off. I see unfortunately, there's been one death, and there's been a couple of other people who have been hurt. Honestly, I don't give it much thought. I'm really sorry to hear. And, you know, and the kids backwards and forwards and started phoning me, and then Kasriel phoned, and he said, Ma, have you heard the news? Have you gotten hold of Ellie? And so began our couple of hours of trying to get hold of Ellie. So number one, we thought he was asleep because he didn't have to work. If Ellie's asleep, his phone is off. So we weren't going to get hold of him. However, when I sent him a message, I saw that it had 2 ticks, which meant that his phone wasn't off, otherwise he wouldn't have received it. Still, apps did not think anything at all. At one point, Kasriel said, you know what, I'm going round to his apartment because I think that something's, I don't know, it's strange that he's not answering his phone. Goes round to his apartment, bashes on the door, smashes the door down almost, can't get hold of him. Still, absolutely no concern whatsoever. At some point, the news came out that it was a 30-year-old who had been killed, and still we didn't know who the other injured person was. So I was like, okay, thank God, Baruch Hashem. I have absolutely nothing to worry about. The second fact that I'll never believe again, that the news in Israel, and I'm sure in many countries, is not reported accurately. Okay, there's a 30-year-old who's been killed. So the morning went, really not very concerned, because I know my child. If he's working, he doesn't answer the phone, and if he's sleeping, he doesn't answer the phone. So it was nothing out of the ordinary. At 12 o'clock, Kasriel sends me a video. And the video had been sent to him by a friend, a mutual friend of his and Ellie's. And she sent it to him and she said, I've just seen this on Instagram. is this Eli? The video, which I'm not going to go into great detail about, one of the things that was clear for me to see was a person who looked like Eli lying on the ground. So I was like, okay, it might be Eli, I'm not sure if it's Eli. Obviously, I think my body registered that something was going on because I did start shaking. But again, the news had told me that a 30-year-old had been killed. So the worst that's happened is this. Baruch Hashem, I didn't really take in what I was seeing. Having looked back at the video now, I have a better understanding of what I was seeing. And I called Avi, who'd gone across the road. I said to him, I think you should come home. I've just seen something. Let's just remember the event happened at 10 to 9. This is now 12 o'clock. He comes home. I show him the video. He says, oh, does Eli have a K-way? So I'm like, I don't know if he has a K-way, but I'm not sure if this is him. Avi said, you know what? I think we need to go to Yerushalayim. So we live in Modi'in. On a good day, it's half an hour drive to Yerushalayim. He said, let's just prepare. And I share this instance with you because this is how sure I was that nothing had happened. I wasn't dressed to go out at that point because I'd been studying. I went upstairs. I said, sure, we'll go to Yerushalayim, see what's going on. I went upstairs and I put on makeup. I went into my bathroom. I said, I'm going to Yerushalayim. I need to just put some makeup on because I'm going out. And I keep thinking to myself, what was I thinking? That I'm doing something so incredibly ordinary. Did I not know? Did I not realize what was going on? And I just have this image of thinking about the fact that I'm going out and I need to look okay, which is bizarre. Anyway, we get in the car, we start traveling to Yerushalayim. At that point, my son Hanan had just gone back to his army base, which was about 3 hours away. And he said, look, you know what, I'm coming back. I don't know what's going on, but I'm coming back. So we had a situation at that point while we were driving where we got hold of Lance Salah, who works for Hatzalah, and we said to him, Lance, we can't get hold of Eli, he must have been involved somehow. We're sure he's okay, but could you just find out what's going on? Kasriel is now going to the police to find out what's happening. Hanan starts phoning around all the hospitals to see whether we can gather some information. Naama wants to be useful. I said to her, you know what, why don't you just run down and see if Eli's at work? It's very possible he's there. And who knows, maybe he's just too busy to answer his phone. So off she goes now. At that point, I phoned Eli's girlfriend, who he was dating seriously at the time. And I didn't want to worry any earlier. And I said to her, Jen, I just want to know, do you know if Eli went to work today by any chance? And she said, I know for sure he did. So I started feeling a little bit unsettled at that point. And as we're driving, we have a lot of things going on. Israel police, Hanan phoning hospitals, Naama at the Kotel. She gets there, she doesn't find him, obviously, and we agreed to meet her at Mamilla. We said, well, you and Jen will pick up at Mamilla, we'll find Kasriel. Hanan's now on a bus on his way back, and let's find out. This is now approximately 1 o'clock. We still know absolutely nothing, except for this video that we received from Instagram. We stop outside Mamilla, Naama gets into the car. Kasriel says, you've got to wait for me. I'm coming, just wait. I'm with the police, I'll be there. Sure, no problem. No rush, we don't know what we're rushing to. Eventually, we see Kasriel running down the road with the policeman behind him, and he says, come, let's go. I said, what about the policeman? He says, forget the policeman, let's just go. We know now where he is. In the meantime, Hanan found out that they had someone who was unidentified, didn't have his ID on him in Harat Safir, and Kasriel says, forget the police, get in the car, let's go. We get in the car, tells us to drive to Harat Safir, which took us about 45 minutes in the Jerusalem traffic. And on the way, I turn to Naama in the back seat and I say, don't worry, Aunt, it's all okay, everything's going to be fine. Look, I got this video. And look, Eli, if this is Eli, we don't have to worry because he's fine. He's just lying here and he'll be okay. All the time, Kasriel's listening to this conversation. Kasriel knew when he went to the police station. They told him. He got to the police station and he said, I'm looking for this person. They said, who are you? And he said, I'm his brother. They said, okay, we'll see. In the meantime, Kasriel, being inquisitive Kasriel, sees on the policeman's phone that Ellie's Tuhudat Zahut number, his ID number, is on the policeman's phone. He says, why have you got that ID number on your phone? He says, because this is my brother's number. And there and then, in the police station, they told him what had happened. So when Kasriel ran from the top of Jaffa to find us, in case he thought he was offered a ride, he wasn't, with the policeman who said, can you just wait a minute because I just need to get my jacket, it's cold outside. That's why he told us to not worry about the police, let's just keep moving. Got into our car while knowing the news, but knowing he could not tell us there because we would not make it to the hospital. Held the news with him the whole way there, directed us through the crazy traffic, heard my conversation with Naama, me telling her that he's okay, we don't have to worry, everything's okay. Telling us, don't worry, there's someone to meet us at the hospital and tell us what's going on. We get to the hospital, we don't know where to park. Avi stops, the guy says, sorry, you can't park there, please go find a parking. He goes off to find a parking. I go with Kasriel, and Naama comes with me, and Jen comes with me. And Kasriel says, don't worry, someone's going to meet us here. We stood in the emergency room at least for 10 minutes. I said, Kasriel, where's this person? He's supposed to be meeting us. There's something to meet us about? Like, where is the person? And he's getting more and more agitated. Still does not hint, not a word. Eventually, Avi's parked the car, and Kasriel says, come, we all need to go down here. And we walk through the regular emergency ward, and we get taken into a room over there. And as we were, I said, all of a sudden, I'm like, what's going on? I thought, I heard operation, I heard something. We walk into this room, he closes the door, there's a woman in there with us who I came to find out is a social worker. He puts his arms around us and he tells us Eddie's gone. And I'm like, gone where? Where's he gone? And that is 5.5 hours after the event happened, he told us. Now Hanan is still trying to get back from an army base. Social media have all the information, they just they couldn't tell it because we weren't there yet. The second we were told the news, it went onto social media with the name. My own family in parts of the world found out from social media. And that's why the Johannesburg Jewish community did not get an Ella Shishler notification. Because the K family did not even know what had happened. And in those few minutes, as we stood there in the room having been told the news, we had an immediate reaction, both Avi and I. Avi's immediate reaction was to say, Baruch Dain Ha'emes. And my immediate reaction was to turn to my children and say, we are going to be okay. We are going to get through this. And I have to say that it's those two statements that I feel are going to carry us forward and have carried us forward so far. Following that, we had no idea what was going on. The only thing I knew is that I switched off my phone immediately. In fact, it suddenly occurred to me that I hadn't told the family that I was okay. I gave my phone to Kasriel, he went to my last dialed number, happened to be my friend, a good friend of mine in Modi'in. The night before, we'd been speaking about going to Cyprus the following week. He called her, he said, Deborah, this is what's happened, I don't know what we're organising, but organise it. And that was it. We were there in the moment. Kasriel took control of everything. He called whoever needed to be called. He called Avi's cousin, who's very involved. The Modi'in friends jumped into action. The Krinkens jumped into action. Lance Sala jumped into action. And we didn't have a clue. So not only are we now dealing with this in a, I'd like to say, I wouldn't want to really say foreign country, but it was. We didn't have a clue. You know, in South Africa, you kind of know the protocol. You know what to do, you know to call. You always know. Didn't have a clue. But that's how we found out, and I wanted to tell you this because I want people to know, it's very, very important to me to know, that we never had the opportunity to share this with our friends, our family, our communities. That opportunity was taken away from us. And I don't hold bitterness and I don't have resentment because I'm not bitter and resentful at this time. But it was robbed of us, that opportunity to be able to break this kind of news to people who are meaningful to us and to people who have known us their whole lives. By the time we walked out of the room a short while later, the whole world knew. And I know from many of my friends how people found out, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I couldn't have broken the news in a more gentle way. I'm sorry things couldn't have been different. But that is the way it was for our family. Moving on from that, I want to tell you a couple of small miracles, as we call them, at this time. Avi's going to talk about the exact place that this Bigua happened, because many of you walk this path without even realizing it. And please God, the next time you walk it, you'll know exactly where the Bigua took place, because we're in the process of setting that up. But one thing I want to tell you is that Eli did not suffer. He was killed by a coward. He was killed from behind at first by unfortunately numerous bullets. And even after he was down, he was shot in the head. But he didn't know anything. He was killed instantly. There was no pain. There was no suffering. And that is a true bracha. When he fell, we could almost say it was in a Kovadik way. He had a backpack on him. And inside that backpack, again, Avi will elaborate, he had two items that, yes, for us as parents, bring a lot of comfort. He had his tefillin, and he had a Sefer Chassidus. Those kind of protected his fall. He fell back onto that backpack, holding onto his bag with his hand in his pocket. And that brings a lot of comfort to us and peace to know that he did not suffer. And he died with the things that he valued in his life with him. Another incredible miracle that took place was that by the time the Mada services got there, which was instantly, they realized that there was nothing they could do for Eli. But yet they also realized that if they left him there, this was going to be a sight for the entire Arab quarter. The murderer would be the martyr, and Eli would be seen as the victim. And what he did, this tzaddik, is he pretended that they could still help Eli, and that they could still administer CPR. And they took him out, supposedly, as alive rather than dead. Because the second you declare a person dead, you have to leave him at the scene so that it can be a proper murder investigation. And this tzaddik said, I'm not doing this. I'm going to keep doing CPR on him. They took him out on a motorcycle into the area where the menorah is to make sure that there would not be any video footage or any martyrdom from the Arabs. And we are forever indebted to that person for doing that. And we have met him. Baruch Hashem, we have met him. The other victim of this pigua was a young married man who'd been married for just about a year. And unfortunately, he is paralyzed. From his waist down, he has absolutely no movement. He was the second person that was shot. And to this day, he's in therapy, intense therapy. He's in the process of putting all kinds of things into their new homes so that he can have movement within his house, etc. Baruch Hashem, I didn't have to make that choice as to what would have been my choice. Don't have to worry about that. The response was incredible from the police. They took down this murderer. Well, the whole event took 32 seconds from the first shot of Eli to taking down the terrorist, despite the fact that the terrorist was on high ground and the police were on the bottom. 32 seconds. That's all it took. So that's what happened. But I want to tell you about 3 instances that jump out at me from our week of Shiva. People saw the footage. I'm not going to rehash what they call was a levaya. For me, it was not quite my type of levaya. But you've seen what went on at the time. The people, the Israeli society, the world, it was huge. I don't want to dwell on that. What I want to talk about is 3 particular visitors, or groups of visitors, that we had during the week of Shiva that I would say have impacted on where I stand today. The first one was Bibi Netanyahu. And I'm not just putting out a name because there were plenty of them and I couldn't care less for it all, to be honest. And this is not a political discussion, and I'm not telling you my political views because I don't really have any because I'm still trying to understand them. When I do, I'll let you know. But what was very, very empowering about Mr. Netanyahu's visit with his wife Sarah, who was delightful, was that when he came in and he sat down, my son Hanan turned to him and said to him, "Could you please tell my sister Naama what it means to lose an older brother? You lost your older brother. Can you tell her what it was like? Can you bring her some words, some comfort, something? Because all the visitors here can speak to her, but she needs to hear from somebody who's been in a similar situation to her." So for those of you who don't know, Bibi Netanyahu lost a brother in 1946 in Entebbe, and out of the entire, sorry, 1976, sorry, I've got my years wrong already, I'm doing well. Sorry for the typo. And he was the only one from that entire mission that was killed. And Bibi Netanyahu turned around to Naama and said, he didn't know how he would live. He didn't know how he would go on with his life. And he also said that, he turned to Naama and he said, "You're doing pretty well." He said, "I lost my taste instantly when my brother was killed. I had no sense of taste whatsoever." He said, "I felt that when my life was over." He says, "You also think that what you're going through now, this torture, this pain, this anger, is going to last forever. It doesn't. It changes. It shifts. It moves with time." Years later, his father was asked how he had managed, how he had survived, how he had moved forward. And his father said to the person asking the story, he said, "The terrain looks different. The terrain changes. You move, you go, you have your ups, you have your downs. You are forever changed. But you keep finding new terrain and you keep finding new places to land." And what was very, very powerful for me hearing him talk is that here is somebody who is saying these words, who has been through the grief, who has been through the pain, who has given his brother was taken for the country, and yet he is making a difference. He is doing something with his life. He's moving forward. He's making changes and trying to make changes. And I walked away from that feeling, this is what I want to be doing. There are some battles I can fight in this country, and there are some battles I cannot fight. He's gone the political route, I can't do that. I'm going to go other routes that we can have an impact, we can have a change, we can make changes. Our terrain is going to go through ups and downs. It's going to be hard and it's going to be painful. But as long as we keep moving forward, that was the message I got from him. The other person that had a large impact on me when he visited was Yonatan Razel. Because when Yonatan Razel arrived, he wanted to bring in his guitar. Maybe even Rabbi Libero was there at the time when he came, I can't recall. And someone said, "No, you can't bring your guitar in because they're sitting Shiva, but come in." And he sat down and there were a number of discussions that took place. And one of the things I said to him is, I don't know how we're going to have a Pesach Seder. I don't know how we're going to sit around the Seder and we're going to sing Vihisha Amda in the way that our family always sang it, with Eli leading and Eli's love of music and his love of playing guitar. How are we going to do it? And he sat there in our room, in the lounge with whoever was there, and he sang V'hisha Amda. And he touched us with his essence. I literally felt the soul of him, the essence of him, coming through those words, saying to us the message of V'hisha Amda. That this is a journey, this is the history of the Jews. It happened to our fathers. It's happening to us now. But through music, and through our souls, and through our connection, we can keep moving forward. And the last group of people who had a different type of impact on me were the people who came from an organization called Mishpacha Achat. I'm not for one second minimizing any of the incredible organizations that take place in Israel for victims of terrorist families. When unfortunately you are in a situation like we are, you become known as a victim of terror. It's a new status. You have a certificate, an official certificate that calls you a victim of terror. And they came in the one night and they said to me, "Welcome to the family. You're now one of us." And I'm like, "Which family is this?" "Well, join the club." And as they're saying this to me, I said, Deborah Kay is not a groupie. She's not doing this club. This is not where I am heading. This is an important aspect for people in Israel. It is important to have these organizations. But I cannot be part of this. It's not who I am. It's not my essence. I don't want to be a club member. I don't want to be a victim. Thank you so much for including me, but I'm actually going to decline. And they had the opposite effect on me, where I realized that this was not how it was going to be for us. We cannot go forward in the way of being part of a club. The victim status has been given to us. We have to accept it. But what are we going to do with it? Where are we going with it? Where are we taking it? And coming out of Shiva, we knew that the K family need to make a difference. And it's not about, "Oh, shame, poor family, they've got nothing else to do with their lives, poor people, they've got to memorialize their son." No way. I've never exactly been a conformist, and I'm not going to do it right now. We have to make a difference, because why did this happen? I don't know why it happened. I don't have the answers, and God and I are not exactly on the best of terms right now. But I'll tell you one thing that I for sure know it was meant to happen. Eli was hand-picked for this. And there is no question of doubt, and I may not be able to stand with a sitter and say the words that are there, and I may stand there and just do my own thing, but I have no doubt in my mind that Eli was hand-picked for this. Does it bring a comfort to me? Does it help me? I don't know what it does. But I can tell you that being busy and working in making a difference has brought me a lot of comfort. People say, "Has it brought you a lot of comfort?" I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. Of course it's brought me a lot of comfort, but I'm choosing it. No one's forcing me to do this. I'm choosing to get involved in projects. I'm choosing to go Chutz La'aretz and speak to these gorgeous children and take Eretz Yisrael to them and make it real, so that when they come on their trips to Israel, it's not like, "Oh, it's just about the Glida and the whatnot." It's about LEK, like it has been about everybody else all these years. And I feel passionately and strongly. And I know Rebecca's having a good laugh, because I was not the Zionist. And I'm still not the Zionist. And I wouldn't have chosen this, and I wouldn't choose it for anybody. But what I'm saying to you is that we have just set up an Amutah, a non-profit organization called the LEK Project. What is the LEK Project? It's lots of things. Right now, it's a Beit Eli, which Abi will talk to you about. Right now, it's a Sefer Torah campaign. This Torah is going to be used by youth groups and adults alike who are traveling through the land of Eretz Yisrael. They need a Sefer Torah to accompany them so that they can learn, because that was Eli's passion. Every project that the K family are doing are about Eli's passion. I'm getting involved in speaking to groups in London now, before they come on these trips, to make meaning, to give them meaning. Kids of today they're chalashing for inspiration. They're chalashing to connect. And if I can help them a tiny bit to do that, then I'm happy to do that, and I'm proud to say that. And for that, I have to say, thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Ellie, for giving me something. People say to me, are you working? I said, yes, in the LK projects. And that does not mean I'm giving up my life for my son. It means I'm thanking Ellie for giving me a different meaning in life, for taking the passions and the love that I have, working with youth, working in education, and being able to channel them into positive things. I would not choose this. It's been chosen for me, but I have chosen what I'm going to do with it. And I'm here tonight just to share with you that this is what we're doing. Kasriel and Shani, just very briefly before my time is up, Kasriel and Shani, a beautiful 2-week-old married couple when this happened, are working on things in Israel. They're working with Mother to ensure that no other family should go through a situation where for 5 hours they don't know that their child's been killed. They're working in the systems. Kasriel has been to every single shiva house in the last few months in Israel, and he says, how can I help you? What do you need? I've got the contacts, I've got the lawyers. I've got everything you need to get money from the government if that's what you need, or to get power of attorney. I didn't have power of attorney on my son's stuff. That's what they're doing. They're working in the country. They're going into things. They speak the language fluently. They can make a difference in Israel. Hanan right now is in the army, and it's challenging for him to be able to do that as well. But please God, he has plans to do that, and he looks forward to coming on a shlichut, hopefully at some point over here when he's finished in the army, because he's very proudly a religious Zionist. Naama, who's, I have to say, it's been a hard journey for her. She didn't choose this aliyah. She kind of came along with us for the ride. Has still not made aliyah. Has just drafted into the army. Please God, she'll find meaning. Please God, she'll be able to use her army service in a way to better the country, to better things, because that's the only place we have that's ours. And I'm proud of my children. And I'm proud of what they've done and how they have taken this. And wherever they go, they take it with them. I'm going to end with one last little thing. Naama has a necklace. The necklace is the Tzanchanim wings, which is the logo that the paratroopers unit have as their logo. When she was in South Africa on her last trip, Laser made it for her, a silver paratroopers necklace. She wears it wherever she goes. A few weeks ago, she was out in Tel Aviv with her cousin. I think we'll keep where you were quiet. But they were out in Tel Aviv, and she's standing there, and a guy turns to her and says, are you in Tzanchanim? I see your necklace. So she says, no. So he says, well, how come you have this necklace? So she says, well, my brother was in Tzanchanim. So he says, who was your brother? She said, Eli K. She says, no. No. And Amma says, why? You knew him. He said, no, I didn't know him. Let me show you something. He takes out his phone, and he says, a few days after Eli was killed, I didn't know him, but I drew a picture of him. I drew a picture of him in what my teachers have told me Gan Eden looks like. He sends her a picture, we have it, of an outline of Eli in a beautiful garden behind him, with beautiful words at the bottom, rest in peace, my friend, my comrade. Random guy in the streets in Tel Aviv, never met Naama, never met Eli. And I say, my boy, you're with us. You're with us every day, every step of the way. And please God, you will make this world a better place. I went over time. I wasn't watching you.
I've done this a few times before, spoken after my wife, but this time I really feel challenged. Rabbi Dar, after your opening words, I almost felt we could have had whatever refreshments are being offered and go home. Where are you, Rabbi? Thank you. Those words just really encapsulated Eli. To my parents, my brothers, my brother-in-law, my sisters-in-law and their families, Yossi Libero, thank you for putting it together. Rebecca, don't worry, Dvorah told me exactly what to say. So it's all time.
Rebecca's been kicked out tonight.
When Dvorah called me, she didn't tell you where I was. I was across the road at the bicycle shop getting her bike just tweaked for the first ride or the second ride that we're going to do as our life returned to normal. And what Dvorah said to me is that I think we're a little bit more invested here than we would like to think. And I literally just walked out the store, turned around and I just walked out. And I came home, and then what happened, Dvorah detailed to you. Let me jump ahead. And I'm now standing in the hospital, and we walk out of the room, and all these people are there. As Deborah said, the Solas and the Grinkins, people who anchor us back to South Africa. And there I saw Rabbi Sobel. And Rabbi Sobel is a rabbi in Modi'in, and to be honest with you, I hadn't had much to do with him. I spoke to him when the government kindly put us in quarantine for 2 weeks in a 4x4 hotel room that hadn't been used in about 10 years. And we spoke through a few things in Kashrus and Hachsherim, and he came across as very clear. And he gave me clear instruction as to what to do and what not to do. And there was it, and I saw him in shul, and I greeted him, and it was very cordial. But I was, the guy with the kapata and the hat in the Mizrahi Dati Lomi community. A little bit odd, but that's where we were. And when we walked out, Rabbi Sobel was standing there. And Deborah said to me, "What's he doing here?" So I said, "I don't know." In other words, how did he get here? Why? And I walked over to him, and the first thing I said to him was, "Rabbi, I need to daven mincha before it gets too late." And he said to me, "You don't daven mincha. You don't do mitzvahs. You don't say brachas. You don't do anything until Eli is laid to rest." And I walked outside, and I walked across the little road that was there, and I watched the sun setting over the Jerusalem hills. And the thought that rushed through my mind was that the sun's going to set, but tomorrow morning the sun is going to rise. And the image that flashed through my mind was me as a shriveled old man sitting on the beach looking totally wasted. And I said to myself, are you going to harness the energy of the sun setting but knowing that it's going to rise? Or are you going to let it happen without you being involved and just let your life waste? That's the choice I needed to make then. And I turned around, and an Arab lady walked past me. And under my breath, I said to her, to myself, to your cousin, I said, "Thank you for killing my kid." And then I caught myself to say, are you now becoming cynical and bitter? Is this what it's all about? And I walked across into the hospital feeling weird that I haven't done mincha. And as I was approaching the doors, there was a young, from couple coming out. And I thought, do the right thing. I opened the door and I let them out, and they smiled at me and said, "Thank you." And I said, "Thank you." And I automatically felt better. And then as I walked into the hospital, there was an Arab couple sitting there. And all I wanted to do was lose it. To scream and shout and perform. And sitting next to them was a soldier, a chayal. And I walked straight to this guy and I hugged him. And I said, "Refuah Shlema." And clearly everybody knew who I was. And I felt it come back to me. And the reason I share these stories with you is because that's the choices I needed to make for myself, right there and then. Am I going to become bitter and twisted and angry? Or am I going to take that frustration and the feelings, the emotion, and channel it in the right way? And thank God we've made the right decision. To jump ahead, the calls that were made to us, the requests that were made of us to become political voices, to stand up and speak out against government, to speak out against the political regime, to use our voice for other people's causes, is a very easy trap to fall into. Before you know it, you've got the stage, and you can say what you want. And thank God we had made those decisions then, because we realized we have a finite amount of energy. How are you going to harness it? Are you going to watch the sun set? Are you going to watch the sun rise? Or are you going to be part of it as it does that? And we've chosen the latter, that we're going to be part of the energy that is good and positive, and not speak in political arenas. Only political statement that we were ever involved with was the destruction of the house of the terrorist. And that was something that we pushed off a lot, until it got to the point where I was called and said, do you want another pigua? Do you want another attack? I said, what do you mean? He said, if we do not destroy this house, there will be another one. Those prophetic words, unfortunately. And Naama and I ended up in the High Court with people that surrounded us to help us. A lawyer that came out of a Shachris minion that I used to go to. And Ofer stood next to us and he guided us through the process. And there was my daughter, innocent, just finished school, head in the clouds, standing telling the world why she's here. There was no words of hate, no words of frustration, words of determination that this is our country and we'll walk here freely. You knew the rules of engagement when you started to dance at this party. And now you need to suffer the consequences. And the house was destroyed. And I don't say that with glee. But that's what the only political area that we've got into. I heard that a senior person in this community, someone that I grew up with my whole life, somebody who was fundamental in us standing here today, turned around to his daughter at one stage, shortly after Eddie was killed, and said, did you hear what happened in Eretz Yisrael? She said, of course I've heard. She says, this time it was different. This time it was one of us. And he didn't say that for his family. He said it for all of you sitting here today. And I know that and I feel that in my DNA. That everybody shared with us. Everybody pained with us. And every time I was asked by some journalist trying to corner me, what do you have to say to the South African media? What do you have to say to the South African community? I keep repeating the same two words. Thank you. Because we were never alone. We felt it from all of you. We knew that you were there. Did we express it at the time? No. But I hope you felt the reciprocal love. And that's not a word that rolls easily off my tongue. But that's really what it was. And when I walked to the back of my father-in-law's shul, when we were there, the first Shabbos, just the Shabbos before Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, people came over to me and said, we were with you. And I said, I know. I can't understand that. But I know that you were with us. And I know that the world suffered with us. He said, no. Eddie was a little blonde-haired kid running up and down these corridors. And then he was a youngster. And then he was a post-bar mitzvah boy. And then he was a young teenager. And then he was an adult, part of our community. We lost a son. And that is so true for the South Hampstead community. And so too for the Torah Academy community, the South African Jewish community at large. But let's maybe share some positivity that came out of this tragedy. And Devorah, you said it so beautifully at the end, and thank you for those words, because you asked me how I was going to end. I'm going to use my ending right now. I stood at Shloshim and I promised Eddie that we will be his pioneers, because he was a pioneer. And he said he missed the kibbutz in his poetry. He missed the ground shaking when the bombs would fall, when he went back to Yerushalayim. And I promised him that we will carry on his legacy. I think so far we've kept our side of the bargain. But when Eddie was killed, he was killed in a street called Rehov Sharsheret, which is a little alleyway. It's a street in the Arab Quarter. So let me quickly paint the picture. You walk into the old city through the Shar Yafo, and by the way, if you have a choice to walk through the gate or walk through where the cars go, please go through the gate, because there's two mezuzahs there. People don't realize that, but there's two mezuzahs there. And if you just keep walking straight, you'll walk into the Arab Quarter. And again, maybe to state the obvious, there are 4 quarters in the old city of Yerushalayim. There's the Armenian Quarter, the Christian Quarter, the Jewish Quarter, and the Muslim Quarter. There's actually one place, which is ours, but at the moment it's 4 quarters. If you just walk straight, you go through the Arab quarter, and that street goes down. And I had clear visions of standing there with my parents as a 10-year-old boy in the shuk, being there, and I could feel it, I could taste it every time I walked through there. I walked through there with my good friend Ari Herman many, many times when we were shiva in Eretz Yisrael. And if you keep walking, if you follow the curve, down there you'll see a sign, Hotel Amaravi, the Western Wall. And about 200 meters before that, 100 meters before that, is exactly where Eli was killed. It happened on Yud Aleph Nisan that I was in Yerushalayim. I was at the lawyer doing our mutar. And again, these are top legal people who just dedicated their time to helping us. And I called Deborah and said, I'm not going to get back to Modi'in on time for Mincha. I'm going to go daven at the Kotel. And Deborah immediately said to me, please don't go past Eli. Go through the Jewish quarter. Turn right and go through the Jewish quarter. It's Ramadan. My cousin's a little bit edgy at the moment, and I just don't need this on my head. And I said to her, that's a good idea. I said to her, there's a lot of people here, there's a lot of security. Let me speak to the security and I'll let you know. Because I told her I was going to do it, I did it, and I walked up to 2 security personnel as you walk into the Arab quarter, and there was a gate there, like they put like a temporary gate. And as I was about to speak to them, a guy says to me, aren't you Eli K's father? So I turned to him, and he was a Haredi guy with black trousers and a white shirt, a frum guy. And I said, yes. He says, do you remember me? So I said, sorry, I don't. He says, I was the one who brought you the pictures after Shiva. And to elaborate on the story, he lives in the Arab quarter. All the Jewish kids who live in the Arab quarter drew us pictures. He put it together in a little booklet and he brought it to us the night after Shiva. He didn't cross the threshold of our flat. He stood outside and said, I brought you a gift from the children of Yerushalayim. And we accepted it. And he said, do you mind if my wife comes up? She's in the car. And I politely declined and I said, we are exhausted. Thank you. Thank you. And that was it. I remember the story. And here this guy approaches me. He said, thank you, I do remember you, and I remember you fondly and warmly. And I walked down, and then I get what we call the Makom HaPigua, the place where the incident happened. And I was standing on the ledge, which is the entrance to a store. The store was closed behind me. And as the Torah says, me and the Eibishter at that point, we weren't quite sure what to say to each other. I wasn't saying Tilim to him. I was just there. And to be graphic, I had this vision of them washing Eddie's blood into the drain that's just over there. And I stood there. And out of the corner of my eyes, where it depicted the road slants down, I see a tall young Arab with peroxided white hair. And he yells at me, not aggressively, he looked out, he says to me, do you want to know where they killed him? I said, yeah, where? So he said, Shama, ala pina, there on the corner. So I point, I said, Shama. He says, yeah. So I said to him, how do you know him? I don't know why I thought to say that. He said, well, ya chaver sheli, he was my friend. He works at the kotel. And I turned around to him and I said, I'm his father. And he looked at me with a shock. And then he started talking to people around, telling him who I was. I know people had recognized me anyway, and I know I'm recognized in the old city. I just felt it's time to move on. And I move on and I'm looking down. And I look up and there's 2 security personnel coming towards me. One was wearing khaki. I hate the way the Americans say it, khaki. They're wearing khaki. And another guy was wearing black. And the guy in khaki says to me, aren't you Eli K's father? I said, yes. And I look, and on the zipper of his jersey, he's wearing a key ring with Eli's picture on it. So I said to him, how do you know Eli? He says, I was in his unit in the army, we trained together. I was at the shiva every day. So I said to him, are you in the book? He said, yes, I'm in the book. All the guys that Eddie served with in Tzadchani made a book, a magnificent picture book, each guy with the message, with all the photos of him and Eddie. And then we started chatting. I said to him, do you know where the Pigua happened? He said, I know it happened somewhere in the street, but I don't know. And I took him and I showed him. And then these two guys, and I will say they were not wearing kippot, weren't wearing yarmulkes, walked me to the kotel. And as we're coming down the stairs, he turns and he says to me, Chabadnik? I said, yes. He said, Good Yontif, Chag Sameach. And I look at this guy, and the reason I tell the story over and over again, is two ends of a religious Jewish spectrum and the Arab in between. And that was Eddie's life, reaching the diversity of the Israeli society, comfortable with everybody. Where the Pigua happened, I was told during Shiva by a guy who came in army uniform, clearly in Miluim, in what the older people here would know as army camps, because nothing really fitted nicely. It's a little bit old to be in the army. Comes out, he's one of the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat HaKotel, which is overlooking the Kotel. And he came to tell me that, do you know that just a few feet from where Eddie was killed is a yeshiva for children called Yeshivat Moria? I said, no, I had no idea. He says, do you know that your son died for those kids? I looked at this guy, I thought like, okay, you bumped your head as you came in. Like, what are you on about? My relationship with Yeshivat Moria has grown from that story. Rabbi Friedman, who's the Rosh Yeshiva, has invited me and I go there every time I'm there. And what they did was when they heard the gunshots, the first thing the teachers did was secure all their kids. They have a protocol. Kids on the floor, in the corner, did it. And then all the teachers went into the street to see how they could help, what they could do. They put themselves on the line. But that's what the people who lived there did. Nice story. But how did they memorialize Eddie? Because after the Shiva, where we walked and we marched the same route from Shari Yafo to the Kotel, Daman Shachris, we went to this yeshiva. And I say yeshiva, these are pre-bar mitzvah boy kids, pre-bar mitzvah age kids. And they did Siyum Mishnais, Shas Mishnais. These kids learned the entire Mishnais on their own. And the word that the Rosh Yeshiva used was man panui, their own free time. They never took time out of Seder. And they learned Mishnais for Eli. And that's where we spent after davening, was with these kids. And this is what Eli generated, was this type of energy. Yom HaZikaron didn't exist in my calendar, to be honest. Yom HaAtzmaut barely existed. I knew about it. The best part about Yom HaAtzmaut was the friction that would happen in high school. Those who did say halal, those who didn't say halal. Rabbi Chazan's compromise of saying it in Tillim, it was the best part of Yom HaAtzmaut. And then Dafka not going to the thing because there was Kol Isha. All of a sudden, Yom HaAtzmaut becomes very personal, and Yom HaZikaron becomes very personal. Devorah and I chose not to be in Israel. This Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. Yom HaAtzmaut follows after Yom HaZikaron because we felt that our impact could be greater outside. We could speak to more people, we could reach more people, we could affect more people. We did videos before, we had presentations before, our children were very, very busy, and our children, Kastrel and Shani spoke at different girls' schools. Kastrel spoke at different events, Hanan spoke at different events, and Amma went with her to a lot of them. But Yom HaZikaron in the morning, Kastrel and Shani were doing nothing. They had nothing to do. 10:30 in the morning, they look at each other, and they say that siren is going to go in half an hour. We're not here. We're going to be with Eli. And they jumped in their car, and they raced to Haram Menuchos to be there with Eli. And they didn't make it on time. The siren went as they were walking in to the cave, because Eddie's buried in a cave. It's a very interesting concept, a bit of freaked me out in the beginning, to be honest. But when they arrived at Eddie's graveside, the place was packed. Everybody from the kibbutz was there. That's both the kibbutz Nirim in the south and Beirut Yitzchak, where Eddie stayed as a soldier. All his friends from the army were there. And people were there with stones that they had collected from where they were. Places that knew Eddie would love. And they were putting him there. There was a bottle of whiskey there. And people were there with Eddie on Yom HaZikaron. As a father, I stand there, I hear the story from them, and it's breathtaking. Here it's Yom HaZikaron, and people have chosen to go and stand by Eddie's graveside. It's just come into my mind, and I know, sorry, I'm being quite graphic, but maybe sometimes that's necessary. Is that night, after Eddie was killed, Devorah and I were driving back home, and we both turned to each other and we said, are we staying? And it was a rhetorical question. Of course we were staying. But I couldn't sleep that night. Of course I couldn't sleep, but the words that went through my mind was, my boy is cold. Because he was being shuttled backwards and forwards between Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv on a gurney in an ambulance, whether he was going to have an autopsy or not. And now that I've done the research and I understand the Jewish aspect of where the neshama is and what the body is, then I didn't understand at the time. But once he was buried, I was calm. But I wasn't entirely sure that he was warm, until someone showed me a picture the next day of all his friends who sat around his grave the entire night, singing around his grave. And the article the next day was, they sat around him like a bonfire. And then I was comforted, because my boy was warm. And yet he's brought a lot of warmth to a lot of people. Let me maybe share, not necessarily to do with Eddie, but the impact that our family has had. How we ended up in Modi'in is Siyata Dishma, is the Eibishter's hand. How we ended up step by step, literally the Eibishter took us by the shoulders and moved us. We ended up in Sukkot at a home. This gentleman happens to be the Menahel of a certain seminary, and to use the word litfish would be an understatement for what this chap is. A very good-looking guy, clean-shaven gentleman, and Hasidic he's certainly not. When Eddie passed away, he came over to me and he said, I want to start learning Tanya. And when I caught my breath, I said to him, my father-in-law has always told me that you need to learn Tanya. The Rebbe says, you need to learn Tanya from someone who learned it from someone else. Tanya is a Masorah. It's not an academic exercise. He says, where am I going to find a teacher for Tanya? So I said, you can use my teacher. Rabbi Gordon, Zeichel Livracha. You can download the app. So does anybody have a tissue? Thanks, Tim. You can download the app, Chabad.org, and you can listen to Tanya every day with Rabbi Gordon. And up front, I make no apologies for his jokes, they're pathetic. We now share the jokes every time we meet him that Rabbi Gordon told that day or the day before. We went there for a meal later on in the year after Eddie was murdered. And during the meal, he pulls a Tanya off the shelf and he opens it. And there's writing all over the margins. And this man is living it. He then says to me, I'm in New York often. I'm going to go to the oil. Give me your names, your family. He messages me, I'm walking in. He messages me, I've just left. My life has changed. On his 4th visit, he takes his wife with. She messages Devorah as she walks out, and she says, I have never felt anything so spiritual in my life. And the reason I share the story is not because I got someone to learn Tanya who never learned Tanya, but because this gentleman taught me what Abbas Yisrael is. And this community taught me what Abbas Yisrael is. Where I was different in my levush, in the way I dressed. In summer it's even worse to wear kapata. But we were accepted, we were endeared, and we were loved even before the pigua. What happens is that there's a Chabad house behind us, Rabbi Neumann, and this year he made a Mashiach Suda for English-speaking people. And the group grew. Last year there was just ourselves and the Greens. This year there were people, and this gentleman was there. But he had a shaila. How can you wash for Hamaitzi so close to Suda Shabbos, to benching Lech? And him and the bench the Rav says, stop asking me shailas, just don't bench, don't wash at least. Just come and eat fruit. And we're standing there, and he says, Rabbi, it's time for Mincha. He says, yeah, we'll get there. We got to Mincha. In the middle of Kabbalah Shabbos, he comes to me and he says loud enough for my good friend Ben Zion to hear. He says, "Nu, what's macht the Litvak? How's the Litvak doing?" And I look at him and he's got this big smile on his face. And when we walk out, he says to me, this Ben Zion says to me, "I never knew there were tzaddikim living in my backyard." And he was referring to the shluchim in Reut, which is the community just behind us. And that's the community that we've had. And this is the impact that we've had on people and the people have had on us. The sensitivity has been incredible. When I went back to Maria Yeshiva with my brother Nachi, the Rosh Yeshiva Rabbi Friedman showed me the CCTV clips of the terrorist. But he edited them so I would never see his face. He said, there's a lot more, but I only want to show you from the back. And why I share that is, as Deborah said, Eli was chosen because the weapon that was used was a foreign weapon. The weapon was collected on Harabais. This person, may his memory be blotted out, would go every day to Harabais. And this day he went and he fetched a weapon. And he stood there and he waited. And he cowardly killed him. And then he went back and he shot him through the head. And yet, when Rabbi Friedman showed me the clips, he was so careful that I would never see the face. The same thing is when we were doing the gravestone for Eli. We had to do it within the Shloshim. We had to think about it literally the week after Shiva. We were very generously offered a beautiful home in Herzliya, and that's where our family was. And the whole week we were working on the tombstone, which is crazy. And Rabbi Sobel held our hand through it step by step. But he kept saying to me, what does Rabbi Groner say? What does Rabbi Groner say? Have you checked with Rabbi Groner? When it came to staying in shul for Yisro, he told me what the minhag in his shul is, what his minhag is. But his next phrase was, what did Rabbi Groner say? And that's what we've been shown by this community, time and time and time again. When I brought the sefer down one evening, that we had all Eli's friends from the kibbutz over, to put it in perspective, one guy was wearing a kippah, one guy washed for the falafel. So you understand the type of crowd that was there. And I said, this is the sefer, and here's the bullet in the sefer. They looked at me to say, we know the sefer. Eli used to learn it with us. And Deborah and I looked at each other, and here was our kid going on a journey, but yet he's sitting in a kibbutz that you have to get written permission to bring a Sefer Torah onto, learning Lekutei Sichos with his friends. When Eli left South Africa the last time, he said, he says, I've got a bakasha nafshis to ask you, a special request. I said, sure, what do you need? What do you want? He says, I want the Rebbe's Tanya. Right away, I knew what he meant. It's a Tanya that the Rebbe gave me, I stood in line for. I said, on one condition, you learn from that Tanya. And that Tanya was sitting on his shelf proudly, together with all my other Sfarim, in his room in the kibbutz. And when we collected his stuff from Yerushalayim, the Tanya there was sitting on the shelf, together with a lot of other contrasting that he had pilfered that I didn't even know about. And they were all sitting there. And what was in Eli's backpack when he was killed, as Devorah said, is his tefillin and misl kutei sichos. And why it's so impactful is just before we left for London, we did a video for Kan News, which is a very popular radio station and TV station in Israel. And two guys walked in, Israeli journalists. One guy had hair that I don't think a Nazi would be proud of him. And the other guy was a very scrawny looking character. It comes out the scrawny looking character was in Duvan for 4.5 years in the elite Israeli unit. So even though he looked scrawny, he was clearly an operator physically and mentally. And the other guy was a journalist. And they set up our house and they moved Sfarim around and then we did this interview. And we're talking. And at one point towards the end, one guy says to the guy from Duvan, do you have any more questions? And he points at his mouth and he says, I can't talk. I know what action Eli had seen as a normal soldier in Sanchanim. I can only imagine what this guy seen for 4.5 years in service. And yet this story leaves him speechless. As they were walking out, I said, guys, Eli's tefillins here. Would you like to put them on? So they turned around to me and said, if it will make you happy, we'll put them on. I said, it definitely make me happy. But do you want to put them on? I said, yes. The Duvduvadnik put on the tefillin, I helped him, sort of knew the brachas, gave him the shema and he said it. The other guy put tefillin on, it was like a golem, he stood there. I gave him the shema, he couldn't read shema. Here's an Israeli who's never seen Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad in his life. And he stood there and he said Shema. And there is Eli impacted on these two guys that I'm sure have walked past plenty of Chabadnikim putting on tefillin and turned them down. But they didn't turn Eli down. And they put on tefillin. Last week, Wednesday, we were in Kfar Chabad. What we were doing in Kfar Chabad, we had a Chanukah Sabayis for Beit Eli. Beit Eli is a home for soldiers, not only lone soldiers, for Shabbos and for Yom Tov. So right towards the end of Shiva, I got an SMS from a guy to say, I'm a shliach, my name is Yosef Yitzchak Cohen, I live in Kfar Chabad, my shlichus is in Kfar Chabad, I'm involved with soldiers, I've got this place, I want to name it after Eli. And that was before I was aware about the traps that you can fall into. And I immediately said, cool, let's do it. And then I met with him. And he explained the scenario, that he's got this pula, this activity that he does. His soldiers come to him for Shabbos and for Yom Tov. And he puts them up in people's homes. He says, but they're not comfortable. They don't want to share a bathroom with a 5-year-old kid. They don't want to share a bunk bed with a teenager. They want their own space. And I've got a space. I just want your permission to name it after Eli. So I said, cool, let's go have a look. My goodness. I don't know if those of you remember when we grew up and we used to have servants' quarters. They were luxury compared to what this place was. So I said, I'm going to speak to my friends in Modi'in and we'll come have a look. I went back there with a few friends. They politely nodded, shook his hand, they walked out, they said to me, Eli's name's not going on this record. Eli's name is not going on this barn. And I turned around and I said, this is the Rebbe's Spulder. This is a shlichus in Kfar Chabad, guys. Let's make it happen. I said, for 80,000 shekel we can make it happen. We'll just bash the place down and rebuild it. Telfed came to the party, which is the South African Aliyah organization, together with private individuals, and we've redone Beit Eli from beginning to end. And guys have given of their time hours and hours and hours. And I stood there, and there was a tekes, there was a ceremony for the Rabbonim of Kfar Chabad with Rabbi Ashkenazi, and then there was a tekes for everybody else that came afterwards. It was just a better way to do it. And I stood at both of them, and I thought, this is what Eli would want. Because Eli was often lonely on a Yom Tov. Was often lonely on the Shabbos, because he was out of his depth. His depth was to be in this type of environment. This is where he wanted to be on Yom Tov. And if we can help a soldier to have a place where he's comfortable for Shabbos and Yom Tov, we're going to do it. And that's what we did. To end off, what is our long-term project? Where do we want to end up? We want to end up that Eli's name is known. Eli's life is known. His incredible journey is known. And that he affects people and infects people in a positive and a pragmatic way that they go forward. Our big dream down the line is Kfar Eli, is a new Yishuv, something brand new, in an area that hasn't been settled yet. Because that's what Eli wanted to do. And who's going to live there? Any Jew who wants to live there, who's respectful and understanding of other people's needs and other people's wants. Shabbos is Shabbos. You don't have to keep it, but you don't have to make other people uncomfortable. Because that's what Eli taught us. That you can do your own thing, you can blaze your own trail without standing on anybody's head. And I want to turn around and say that it is South Africa, it is the South African community, it is the Torah Academy School, it is everything that goes on with that gave us everything that we have. Devorah and myself and our children. Not only did it give us physically a place to live and grow up in, but it gave us our moral compass. And we hope it will do you all proud. And we hope that together Eli's legacy will live on. And we hope that going forward we'll get together to celebrate the amazing life that he had, the amazing things that he did, the free spirit that he was, and that we can all get together for only good times and happy times. Thank
you. So just wanted to thank everybody for joining us here tonight, but I think more importantly to thank Avi and Devorah. I think we're all kind of like that the one guy in your story, very speechless and moved, but I think on behalf of all of us here and on behalf of the Torah Academy community and the Jewish community in South Africa, we're very honored and we're very privileged that you have joined us this evening and have shared with us. It's been definitely an opportunity for all of us to connect in a very different way to how we've been able to process it and how we've been or felt connected to you as a family. So I just wanted to really thank you, and I think it's been a real big privilege for all of us. Thank you.